Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Um, if I could do a quick mic check, if someone can just let me know that you can clearly hear me. I just want to make sure because I am using a different headset today. Actually, a very lighter headset, I will say. But if you can just give me a quick heads up, quick okay, and then we should be good to go. Prachi, if you can hear me, good afternoon, by the way. Let's see. Let me actually check something while everyone kind of rolls in here real quick. See something. Tomorrow is the 6th. All right. Wow, we got a busy day tomorrow. We're good. Appreciate that, guys. Good afternoon, Tom. Good afternoon, Addy. Appreciate you guys all joining. So I was actually just taking a peep really quickly at the economic calendar for tomorrow. I mean, obviously, we had basically our PMI data this morning. We had our jobless claims number that came out. The trade deficit numbers came out this morning. And then we also had Bullard that spoke, kind of gave the market a little bit of a relief bounce during the middle of the lunch hour, more or less. So that was a nice little bounce. But going into tomorrow, we actually do have a lot on the plate tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be a handful. We have non-farm payrolls tomorrow. We're also going to have ISM services index coming out tomorrow. Factory orders are coming out. And then on deck, we basically have about four speakers. So that is going to be a jam-packed day tomorrow. I would not be surprised that we actually do get volatility from maybe if not one is going to be about two of those catalysts that's going to be coming out tomorrow. So I will say pretty much tomorrow is going to be one of those days where I would say it's more than likely that you trade light tomorrow. Would be my assumption for you. All right, just because obviously you're going to get wicked out of your positions. You're likely going to see some volatility kind of play a factor. So for I think our mental sake, I think it's probably likely best to pretty much end up trading light tomorrow. Let's see what else real quick before I kind of go through SPY here. Bought a Tesla Leap today. Good idea. Tom, I will take a look at that Tesla chart. I think from what I've heard, a lot of people actually have it going below $100. I will say that. That's probably my biggest concern. And the fact that here's the thing to think about, Tom, right? Is that ideally the market hasn't found a bottom yet. And that doesn't mean that there's not value stocks out there that actually present a good buy for long terms in terms of leaps. But the fact that you ended up going into a name in particular that's was I want to say heavily overvalued compared to what circumstances are now in terms of the multiples that we're now starting to come into. I would particularly say that ideally I would have liked to have bought in it below $100 be the case. So I would say hopefully you got a starter position, and if come to the point where it's under $100, you basically look to average in. All right. Otherwise, I would say look to pretty much cut your loss at as soon as possible, and then look to enter in at a later time. That's basically what would be my assumption. And the fact that no, obviously, like I mentioned, the bottom is not in. The fact that Apple and Tesla and Microsoft, those three leaders, as the market's going to continue to weigh to the downside, it's likely that those three names are going to continue to pretty much take some heavy selling pressure. All right. Let's see what else real quick. Is job data before market open? I believe it is before market open. Just confirming. Yes, non-farm payrolls are going to be at 8:30 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. All right. So that'll be an interesting part. I think that's likely going to set up the day for us, which I will pretty much kind of give you an assumption of what I'm looking at with, especially with all those catalysts on the table. I mean, just hindsight wise, in terms of all those catalysts, it does feel like it's going to be another bloody day tomorrow. That's just hindsight in terms of the amount of catalysts that we have that's going to be on deck. All right. Real quick, let's see what else. Prachi, you mentioned to take a look at EMPH and MDB. I will definitely get to those real quickly for you. Just to pretty much give you a quick rundown on SPY, right? I kind of came on live yesterday. I talked about the wedge that we're basically trading in, talking about the wedge closing in as the range is going to get tighter and tighter. I also mentioned about the fact of two pivotal levels to pretty much play the extremes of this wedge rather than getting chopped up in the middle of the wedge. And that was either playing to the downside below 381 or playing to the upside above 384. Those are basically your extremes. What did we end up getting today? Well, we got the breakdown below 381, took us down towards wicking our trendline support towards that 379 mark, and that's where we were able to find some intraday support. All right, so we are basically right at that trendline support. Now, what's my leading indication going into tomorrow now, right? With all of those Fed speakers, it's going to be on deck. Now, what would end up particularly happening in my case is that I believe that sentiment riots, I think it is pretty much dull, despite the FOMC minutes yesterday, despite the Fed speaker. I think we are in a negative sentiment right now. And being as support, I think the best case, that not necessarily the best case, but the worst case scenario to end up happening, being as support that we closed, is that market makers are likely going to end up gapping us down, breaking this little wedge to the downside, and then by morning we would have missed basically the bigger directional move, the bigger directional breakout. That's what my assumption is, that we like gap down overnight. That's just an assumption, right? With the catalyst that's in play, with the trendline support that we're pretty much sitting at right now. But flip side to that, there's always a flip side, is that going into tomorrow, what would end up needing to happen to play the upside? I would need to see a break right back over above that 381 spot where we initially broke down this morning. So if we can reclaim 381 on SPY here tomorrow, that would be your upside scenario, and that would also be reclaiming the 2 hour 20 EMA here. That's sitting at that 381 spot as well. All right, so 381, that's going to be your pivotal level to the upside. As far as the downside here, I would particularly look to see if we end up breaking down below 378. Otherwise, what may end up happening is that we may look to kind of escalate below the 378, but look to trap those that are pretty much trying to feed into that selling pressure. And that would be basically where I would say look to not get trapped tomorrow to the downside. That's my only concern, is if we end up getting the gap down tomorrow morning and maybe we get a trap and then particularly even go sideways for most of the day. All right. So that's pretty much just a rundown. I don't think it's pretty clear cut in terms of just sitting at the support of the wedge. But then feeding into that breakdown, if we get it overnight, that's my bigger concern in trying not to get trapped on that. All right. So that kind of just cuts that short and sweet for you with SPY. Let's see if I can kind of get into those tickers real quick, and then I'll see some names that actually kind of cross my attention, and I'll get into those. All right. Let's see the daily off of EMPH here, our energy name. A beautiful breakdown. I actually recall, I believe it was El Lobo. Those of you that are familiar with him, I believe he's been one of those that's actually been on this stock quite a bit. I was actually calling for it to kind of break down here towards that 255 mark, and off of the daily, basically touch that 200-day EMA. But where are we at now? We essentially broke down below that 200-day EMA. What will be my play if I'm looking to take a trade on this? I will look to see if we end up breaking down below 234. Below 234, then you have a beautiful gap fill that will go into play, and that will confirm the continuation of this downtrend. That's how I would go about it in terms of playing the downside in continuation. But given the fact that you do have a straight line to the downside here, it would be plausible in which case that we kind of hold our daily low here today, and then we go to retest that 200-day EMA at 255 half, and that's where you're gonna have to decide. The other option is that you can end up shorting it at the 200-day EMA on the retest as a resistance, or you end up waiting for the 234 to break and you play the gap fill to the downside. All right. So that will basically be my two assumptions of the ways you can play EMPH here towards the downside, in which obviously we do know from right now with current market conditions, the upside is rather limited. All right. So either short it at 255 half or you look for the breakdown below 234 to play the gap fill to the downside. All right. Let's see the other name that you mentioned for me to take a look at. MDB. I have not looked at this ticker in a hot minute. Another one with a beautiful gap fill. That's actually very notable as well. So a beautiful gap fill here. I think this is another one. You have a beautiful rounding top action that took place. I would wait until you end up getting into the gap fill and you confirm. Otherwise, you're going to get trapped if it ends up defending the gap fill at this 167 high. And so that's where I would say look for when it actually enters the gap fill below 167 half. Then you have a beautiful double digit breakdown here for MDB, and you play that all the way down towards gap fill, according to the fact that you're going to end up playing a swing rather than a day trade. All right. But I think the caution part here is don't try to enter too early above the gap fill being entered, because then you're likely going to end up getting trapped. All right. Because if it ends up defending the gap fill, this could potentially go sideways and you're likely going to end up just eating a premium. All right. So watch for the break here. Once you get into under 167, that's what I say that you should end up getting a good confirmation of confirming that breakdown. Let's see what else is on the radar. Diego Baba. I believe someone actually had me look at this yesterday. I think someone actually had me look at it. Beautiful continuation on this. The resistance, I was actually watching a Baba for continuation here. This should end up trading up towards about 107 here is what I'm watching for resistance. If I actually draw that line out for you, this is basically right around that 107 mark is what I'm looking here. And so that would actually be the resistance. You're going to close right into it. More than likely, you could even get the gap up tomorrow if China does well overnight. So watch for the 107 resistance. I don't want to say end up shorting it at that 107 resistance because obviously you see the relative strength on Baba compared to the broader market. But 107 will be that spot if you wanted to pretty much nibble at playing the reversal. That's where you look to end up getting into some puts at 107. Otherwise, you look for continuation above 107, and your next PT you're watching is 110 half, and above that, then you're looking to target 114. All right, that's basically the two ways that I would particularly look to play it. All right, but the key level is 107. That's pretty much the big key level that you want to keep on radar. Let's see if I move on. So nothing else is pretty much in the chat for me to take a peep at. Kind of three names that kind of caught my attention that I've been looking at, kind of monitoring the past, I want to say, few days or so. FedEx was one of them. I think I outlined this name not too long ago as well. But a beautiful megaphone that's taking place on FedEx. So a nice little breakout. I haven't even touched this chart since probably the last time that I actually uh, announced it on YouTube and we went over it because I didn't even have a need to actually change anything. But a beautiful breakout that we had on Tuesday, nice little downtrend break that took place. We got a nice gap up off of yesterday's price action, and a nice little bit of a pretty much a little retrace, a little consolidation type of price action today. So what am I going to look at for this one? Well, my well-defined support level is down at 178.34. Right, but what I'm going to be looking for is to see if we can end up basing at 179. If we can base at 179, then I'm going to look to end up getting the breakout right back above 182, confirming above 183.10, and then you have your December 13th high that's sitting at 184.39. So this is a name I do believe that there's more further upside on FedEx. It's just going to be a matter of that potential dip buy spot. Is it going to be at 179 defending, or is it going to end up potentially looking to gap fill off of that 20-day EMA, and that will take it down towards 177 half? All right, but I do really like this chart. I think there is further upside. And I think at pretty much the worst case, we should at least end up contending with this high from December 13th, even if there's not further continuation beyond that. All right, so that's what I'm pretty much looking at as well. I will Diego Caterpillar. Hasn't this name actually been vertical? I think it's actually been vertical. No, I mean it's been a beautiful uptrend so far, but I guess it hasn't been as vertical as I thought it was. But that is a straight line drive up. That is a beautiful chart, I will say. Let's see what else kind of stands out to me. You do look like you are flagging here off the daily here, in which it does want continuation. Two ways I would look to play this. Either one, you look for the breakout above 243. You played above 243 and you're going to be looking at a new 52-week high. That's ideally the first way I would look at it. So above 242 half, then you look for a new 52-week high to take place. Otherwise, flip case scenario, if you're looking for potentially a breakdown, then you watch to see if you can get a breakdown below 235. I believe you could trade this down towards 227 to test that 50-day EMA. And in which case, that would also be basically your level where you based a little bit of a consolidation before continuation on the uptrend. All right. So over 242 half, you look for the breakout, new 52-week high. Otherwise, you look for the breakdown and you trade it down towards 225 is what I would be watching for. All right. Prachi, I think I've been mentioning, I think every YouTube live I've had, I think I've mentioned Boeing to everyone, but I know it's not a fan favorite, but that has just been a nonstop printing machine in terms of this uptrend. Well, the market's been red, it's been bloody. I mean, this name has actually pretty much held its own. The relative strength has pretty much been there every day. Now, I will say that you are closing in on some pretty heavy resistance once you get close enough to this gap fill. And so I do still have this going up towards 209, but that's when I would caution for continuation beyond that point. So watch 209, and I think that's where you're going to end up kind of getting some resistance, and I would pretty much caution about playing it above that, in which is likely going to be overbought territory. All right. Let's see what else. Adi, you mentioned VXX plays tomorrow. I'm not too much of a fan of playing VXX. It would likely end up pretty much, especially on a Friday, in which more times than not on a Friday, I've particularly noticed that we likely end up getting chopped up for most of the day. And when I started out the segment, my concern was that if we end up gapping down overnight, I don't think there's much more so going to be too much that's going to end up paying out worthy for VXX. I think you're likely going to have better plays in other names, and even shorting SPY for that matter, you may end up having a better opportunity in terms of getting the best bang for your buck, because more than likely we'll likely end up getting a breakdown, a gap down, and then we'll likely see quite a bit of chop in which VXX is not going to be as useful for you. So I would likely end up saying to kind of fade looking at VXX, and if be the case, look to just pretty much play spy puts. Especially on a Friday, I think Wednesdays and Fridays, from my experience, more so than not, those have actually been the days in which we get chopped up the most, in which premiums get destroyed, and especially a name like VXX, where the volatility, it might end up being elevated, but more than likely, once the opening bell pretty much kicks, you're likely going to end up getting chopped up with VXX. All right. Let's see what else is kind of on the radar. I will say Walmart has also been another one that's been on the radar ever since I believe it was Sig that actually kind of brought this one to my attention. A beautiful little channel action that's taking place on Walmart, especially if the market's bloody tomorrow. I will look for this one to pretty much be a factor for me. I do want to see if we can end up potentially holding this 142 spot. As long as we hold 142, I believe we have another leg up in which you're going to look for breakout above 143.84 and test that hourly 200 EMA at 144.62. So this should be a beautiful one, especially if the market, I don't want to say especially if the market's red, but even if the market is red tomorrow, Walmart does potentially look to pretty much act as a value play. So I would like this one if it can at least hold that 142 spot. We hold that. I think that'll be one that'll be a viable play for a day trade at least tomorrow. All right. And then the last one that's also another one in retail area there was Target. It's just been a phenomenal channel that Target's been in. But the most notable thing is if you actually notice the median line, the dotted blue line going across that channel, it has actually been respected pretty well so far. And right now you actually bounced right off of support here, the low of the day here for Target. That last candle bounced right off of the median, the upper band of this channel. So I would watch for continuation. If you get a break above 154 half here, then I would look to trade this up towards 157 is what my next PT would be. All right. So that'll be another one I kind of keep on the radar. We'll see how that ends up particularly playing out. Otherwise, outside of that, not too much that's on the radar. Of course, we'll see where our rotation is in terms of our three-headed monsters. Your Microsoft, your Boeing, your not my Boeing, but Microsoft, Apple, and Tesla. We'll see what the rotation is. I did actually mention yesterday about Tesla. Well, the thing I mentioned about Tesla is that we had a little bit of a green action yesterday. We saw it up about 5, 6 points yesterday. I wanted to see if there was going to be a follow through on Tesla, right? I wanted to see if what was basically relative weakness for the past felt like a month already, were we going to see any kind of life? That was not the case, right? But the good indication is that it did not end up bleeding out. We didn't get close enough to double digits on Tesla bleeding out. So let's see if we get, if today more so kind of gives us a little bit of a groundwork in which we get some relief. And there's days where we've actually seen Tesla show relative strength, even despite the whole broader market. So that'll be something I actually kind of pay attention to as well. Annette, Cass, can I talk about Apple? Let's take a peep at Apple. Let's see what's going on with her. I'm actually going to pull it out. Let's see the bigger picture here off of the weekly. I will say that Apple, as much as I wanted to kind of see Apple hold up, it was more so kind of holding that 126, 127 spot. I'm not too fond of this name actually getting a pretty solid reversal just quite yet. I believe at the best case scenario, you likely end up tapping support at 123 before you end up getting a reversal. Now, the only thing about that, trying to kind of buy the dip there at 123, which ultimately, yeah, that's my next major support level that I believe that will end up tapping even if we end up gapping down per se, pre-market. Now, the bigger concern is that you have the weekly 200 EMA if we end up escalating to the downside. And that's sitting basically at 120, to be precise, 119.94. That's my bigger concern, is whether we end up pretty much continuing this breakdown towards that 200-day EMA before we really see any kind of meaningful reversal. Because what you may end up seeing, you may see a little bit of a dead cat bounce, I want to say. But ultimately, right now, it does feel like that 200-day weekly EMA is a magnet right now before we end up getting continuation, before we get a reversal more so. If I actually had to give you the viable play on this and how I would go about playing it, I would look to buy it off of that 123 mark. But knowing the fact that, yeah, you're gonna want to have a stop loss in place, of course, because like I mentioned, the 200 EMA on the weekly here being a magnet. All right, but if you really had to tell me where I wanted to buy it and how I would go about playing it, I would look to end up buying it off of 123. But more so, if we the short that I would prefer is that if we break down below 123, then that's about a near 3.5 point move to the downside to test that 200-day EMA. So those are basically the two ways I would look to play it. All right. So hopefully that kind of cleared it up and kind of gave you a better idea of how I look about it. All right. Other than that, though, I don't think there's anything too much else on the radar for me. I think I kind of touched bases on what I wanted to see. Obviously, you see that basically where your relative strength was today. It was Boeing. It was Netflix. In the morning, it was actually Apple. We actually thought Apple was going to hold on, but the market was not going to let that happen. And I believe that we're likely going to end up testing that 123 spot, like I mentioned, before we get any kind of reversal action, even if it is a short-term reversal. All right. Other than that, though, I will wrap up today's session. I appreciate all of you guys joining as always. But other than that, you guys all have a great afternoon, and I will see you guys later, everyone.